And then his body basically goes squish, and he's flat again.
I flatline.
So again, what do you have to do to jump?
You have to squish the molecules.
You have to squish the molecules with a normal force that is, or you have to squish the molecules with a force that is what compared to your normal force? Greater than. You have to squish the molecules under your feet with a force that is larger than your weight. If you don't, then you just go. You can't leave the ground. In order to leave the ground, you have to exert more force than your weight. So when your molecules push back, when the molecules under the floor push back, they push back with more force than your weight, and you're launched. Make sense? So when you jump, is it you who's going into the air? Who's causing yourself to go into the air? What direction are you pushing?
Down.
Down. What direction do you go? Up. So when you jump, is it the floor that's causing you to jump, or is it you that's causing you to jump?
Floor.
It's the floor. So
We've been playing with
Exactly.
like inverted controls the whole time.
the whole time, exactly. So when Thane goes up for a funky dunk, he has to squish the molecules under his feet, and the molecules will push back, causing him to catch air, so he can dunk on the noobs.
We all molecules climb down.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Nice.
Yeah, I'm good at OpenJ.
Inverted fly doesn't have to.
Can I make this go? Can I move on? Scott.
Is the force plate, like, is it taking into consideration gravity right now? Is that why it's -10? So when you stand on it, you get a more accurate reading, or is what's going on there?
No, unfortunately, it needs to be zeroed after every hit because it's not very good. People have jumped on it for so long. It's about 10 years old. People have jumped on it for so long, it's starting to fall
Are
apart.
you calling them that?
He's
Yeah.
calling him big girls.
Yes, thank you. Like your mom.
Hey, Red Dog might have to
Your mom's weight would exceed the normal force capacity of the force plate. It goes up to 4,000 newtons.
That's a lot if you didn't know.
Yes, it's quite a bit.
Y'all see me on my come up.
You know, so is your mom. So
Friday at 7 come out.
We can't be talking right now. We just lost on the left
all right. So back to this.
because we lost. What do you want me to say?
All right, so that's normal force. Once again, normal force is a vector. So what we usually do is draw something like this. So if this is you,
I never blame you.
this is you. What force are you exerting? Just sitting there. Downward force. You're exerting a downward force, and we're going to label it what?
Wait.
But for
Butt force. FG.
Force.
Force sub butt. FG. And if you are not moving, then what does the other force look like?
Normal.
Yeah. How should that compare to the magnitude of FG? Should
The exact same going
be the
up.
same? Is that about the same?
yeah.
No, it's a
No,
little bit
it's a
bigger.
little too much.
There we go. Is that about the same?
Yeah, it's better.
Fn. So so your normal force, if you are not moving, should be the same magnitude as your gravity, your weight force. This is called a free body diagram, and we're going to revisit this concept a while back, quite a bit more in the future. Free body basically says you take the body you're looking at and you put it into space and draw arrows on it. Okay, the arrows anchor at the center of the free body. So sometimes they call this just force diagram. I can't remember if the College Board is still calling it free body diagram or just force diagram, but that's what we call it. Free body or force diagram. Arrows. Okay, questions so far? Now we're gonna get to my favorite. Friction. Friction. One of the most misunderstood forces that exist. Friction is also a balancing or a pushback force. It's kind of like a special normal force, but don't call it normal force.
I'm gonna say intermolecular force between molecules.
Solid plane, intermolecular force between molecules.
Yes.
If you want to reduce the friction, you want to reduce the intermolecular attraction between molecules.
How would you do that?
realm of chemistry. We make polar molecules repel other polar molecules, or non-polar molecules repel polar molecules.
That's why the bullet train goes.
So we're saying like physics and chemistry go hand in hand?
Absolutely.
Sick.
You know what they say? Physics is the distillation of chemistry, which is the distillation of biology, which is the distillation of psychology. Or no, yeah, psychology, which is the distillation of sociology. And math is the distillation of physics.
Just all goes around. Just we find out.
Everything is math.
No, I didn't know they said that.
Part of the reason that your parents elected Trump, math.
Nah.
It's all math. Okay, so friction can be kinetic or static. Static friction is the first thing you must overcome to get something moving. Kinetic friction is what you must continue to overcome to keep moving.
We know he's not good at geography.
Yeah. Or any ology at all.
He's good
So
at talking now.
bestest ever. This is going to be the best impeachment. I love impeachments. Okay, so anyway, all right. So if Callie is going to push Talon off his chair,
I do it.
she first must overcome static friction. Once Talon gets going, she'll only have to overcome kinetic friction. Which one's bigger?
Static.
Static.
Static friction, exactly. Because in order to get something moving, you must first overcome inertia. Remember inertia from middle school?
Yeah.
Objects at rest tend to stay at rest, objects in motion tend to stay in motion. So you first have to overcome inertia, but once you overcome inertia, you're not overcoming it anymore, it's working with you. So we're going to investigate this in a lab on Wednesday.
Oh, that's-
So you first have to overcome static friction, but once you overcome that static friction, then inertia is working for you. This is why when you're moving a refrigerator, you're like, and it's, you have to push and it really goes.
Yeah, let's say like.
Yeah, or a dresser,
You're moving something
or your mom.
heavy.
You gotta like,
Or your mom.
and then once you get it going, it just goes.
Yeah, once you get it rolling, she'll just go right down to the
Yeah.
driveway.
Okay, does this idea make sense? Okay, consider this. I'm going to push on this bookcase. Okay. How does the friction force of the bookcase on the floor compare to my applied force? Is it smaller, bigger, or the same? Ask your neighbor. So I'm just going to apply, it's not moving yet. I'm applying a force on the bookcase. The bookcase is not moving, but it's basically pushing back. So does this friction force the bookcase apply smaller, larger, or the same?
Like right now, or?
Right now.
The same.
Oh, I mean, you know, it's. Are you applying the same?
If you were to-
If it was larger, because you can push more than it was lower. So it's the same, so just staying.
I feel good about your instincts. You guys got good physics instincts. Okay, so if you think the friction force that it's applying back on me is smaller, raise your hand. Okay? If you think it's bigger, raise your hand. If you think it's the same, raise your hand. It is the same, because it's not smaller, because if it was smaller, I would be pushing it forward. I would be basically creating what's called a net force. And it's not larger, because if friction force is ever larger, what direction would it be moving? It would be pushing me back. There would be a net force pushing me back. So it is the same. And even if I push more on it, it's still the same. Little bit, same. A whole lot, same. So as long as it's not moving, it's going to apply the same force. So friction force, much like normal force, is a balancing force. It does have an upper limit, but it's going to increase until it reaches that upper limit. So if you were to draw a graph of friction force versus push, so I'm going to write FF, and I'm going to write FA, force applied, force friction. Sketch what this graph might look like. So a graph of force applied, this is me, versus force of friction, this is bookcase. What's it going to look like?
Just.
What kind of straight line? Sketch it. Sketch it.
Oh, it'd be like, because
Physics is art for mathematicians.
it'd be like, it'd be a straight diagonal line because the more you push on, the
Okay,
more.
so what's it gonna start looking like? Show me with your hand. Is it gonna look like this, like this, like this, like this?
But
Yeah,
then
most of you realize it's going to be a 1-to-1 ratio. It's going to have a slope of 1 because the force applied is going to equal force of friction until eventually the force of friction becomes not less, but a maximum value.
Yeah.
So then it'll just basically go, as we apply more and more friction force, that'll happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is going to be equilibrium, and this is going to be a non-zero net force. Meaning a net force will suddenly exist. And when a net force suddenly exists, what happens? It starts accelerating, yeah. Okay. So we got, yeah, it starts accelerating. So friction force, static friction, kinetic friction. Static friction is always larger than kinetic friction, and there's of course a formula. A formula based on the coefficient of friction, which is mu. This is the Greek letter mu. It's used a whole bunch of things. Chemists and physicists love mu. I don't know what the deal is with mu, but the formula is friction force equals a coefficient of friction multiplied by normal force.
Wait, does the F in friction force and the F in the what is the F?
Normal force?
Yeah, normal force. Doesn't that need an arrow or no?
Yeah, they should be vectors. And since you mentioned it, this is also important.
So
The friction force is going to be perpendicular to the normal force.
So is mu a constant?
Mu is a constant depending on factors,
Okay.
like the material, temperature,
So
that kind of
it's
stuff.
gonna change depending on.
Yes, but like steel on steel, the reason that railroad rails work, is the coefficient of friction is 0.74, which is pretty big. The reason that your tires are made of rubber is rubber on concrete is 1.0. The reason your wheels are not wood or something else.
Oh, so the.
Ice on ice. Do you think ice on ice has a high coefficient of friction or a low coefficient of
High.
friction?
Let's say low.
The higher the number on the mu, the
The higher.
more it glides, or?
The higher the number, the more friction will exist.
Okay.
Yeah. So friction force is a portion of normal force.
Wait, but what on wood has like.
So she's
four.
Yeah, wood on wood's a lot. So it turns out ice on ice has a very high friction coefficient. So why is it that an ice skater what's the final score? I saw one was like 5-1 last night.
Oh, no,
Hockey. They were playing San Jose. It was like 5-1. I'm like, well, back to Sunday Night Football. Anyway, so the reason that you can slide across ice is not because
Isn't it
it's
just the water on top of the ice?
exactly. It's the water on top of the ice. The friction coefficient for water on top of ice is very, 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 very small. Ice on ice is very high. 2 ice cubes under 0 degrees trying to rub up against each other, they won't rub very well at all. They won't move. But when there's water in between, they slide.
Is that how if you like a piece of ice and it sticks to your tongue? Is that part of it, or because
No.
it's not?
It sticks to your tongue because it freezes the water in your tongue.
Um,
And just basically you become one with the ice.
So, I'm just trying to read this. It says you said the higher the mu number, right? The more friction there is.
Correct.
So the steel on steel has less friction than the rubber on concrete. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what's the difference between the mu of S and the mu of K?
Okay, so mu of S is the coefficient static. Mu of K is the coefficient kinetic. And you have to overcome the static first before you can approach the kinetic. And notice static's always higher. Remember why static is always higher?
There's inertia.
There's inertia. You have to overcome inertia. Once you do overcome inertia, then inertia starts working for you. Bro.
So is there like no mu when rubber's on wet concrete, or is it just like not
I don't know. It appears to be. It appears
Yeah.
that it's the data is
But I
inconclusive.
feel like there would be friction though anyways, because everything has to have some type of friction.
Because it's really not wet concrete, it's gonna be rubber on water.
Yeah.
And water has extremely low coefficient of friction. All right, does that make sense?
So if you're doing ice on ice, it would be pretty much ice on water. Is what you're trying to say.
Right. So cold ice on cold ice has a very high friction coefficient. But when that metal blade squishes the ice, that amount of friction, that tiny amount of friction at the front of the blade causes water to form. So the blade is no longer traveling over the ice, the blade is traveling over water. So there's a little layer of water between the blade and the ice. And the cool thing is, once that pressure is gone, the ice reforms, keeping the ice from being slippery. Does that make sense? So what happens is the blade goes over the ice, at the tip of that blade, water forms, and now you're gliding over water as more and more water is made, and since it's still colder than 0 degrees, as the blade leaves, that water re-solidifies into ice.
That's cool.
Very cool. Okay, so this is my joke. A white cat and a brown cat are walking on a roof and start to slip. Which cat slips off the roof first?
The black cat.
It's a brown cat and a white cat.
You really went there.
Still brown.
Still brown.
Still brown.
Neither.
You got a white cat and a brown cat. They're slipping off roof. Which slips off roof
I
first?
feel like it both slip off.
The one with the smaller mew.
Oh my gosh.
I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing.
Okay, Talon, can you hit the button, please?